Picture this. You're 30 years old, successful career, good health, financial stability, and genuine happiness. You walk into any social gathering and within minutes someone asks the question that makes everyone uncomfortable. When are you getting married? Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. The discomfort isn't about your answer. It's about what your contentment represents. You're living proof that their most fundamental belief about human completion might be wrong. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche and discovered something that would shock most people. The desperate need to find your other half isn't natural human psychology. It's manufactured dependency that serves a system much larger than your personal happiness. Think about every Disney movie you watched as a child, every romantic comedy that shaped your expectations, every family conversation about settling down. All of them delivered the same message. You're incomplete without romantic partnership. But what if I told you this message wasn't about love at all? What if it was about control? Jung understood something that modern society desperately tries to hide. A psychologically whole individual doesn't need external validation to feel complete. And complete individuals are dangerous to systems that profit from your neediness. Right now, there are millions of people staying in relationships that drain their energy, compromise their dreams, and diminish their potential. Not because they're happy, but because they've been convinced that being alone means being broken. Jung called this the collective unconscious, shared beliefs so deep we mistake them for natural law. But some people break free from this programming. They discover what Jung called individuation, becoming psychologically whole within themselves. And when you meet one of these people, something inside you shifts. You realize that everything you believed about human completion might be a carefully constructed lie. Stay with me because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see every relationship around you, including your own. The marriage industrial complex isn't just selling you a ceremony. It's selling you the belief that you need to be saved from yourself. But Jung discovered that the people who save themselves become the most powerful force in any room. And that power terrifies a world built on your emotional dependency. Carl Jung walked into his practice every day and saw the same pattern. Successful, intelligent people who felt fundamentally broken because they couldn't make relationships work. But here's what Jung noticed that changed psychology forever. The problem wasn't their inability to connect with others. The problem was their inability to connect with themselves. He discovered that most people project their missing psychological pieces onto romantic partners instead of developing those pieces within themselves. Every man carries what Jung called the Anima, his inner feminine energy. Instead of integrating this aspect of himself, learning to access his emotional intelligence, intuitive wisdom, and nurturing capacity, he projects it onto women. He literally makes them responsible for parts of his own psyche. The same happens with women and their animus, their inner masculine energy. Instead of developing their own assertiveness, logical thinking, and independent strength, they look for men to provide these qualities. This creates what Jung called psychological dependency. You don't love your partner. You love the parts of yourself that you see reflected in them. But here's where it gets sinister. This dependency is exactly what society needs to function. A psychologically dependent person is a controllable person. They can't leave bad situations because they believe they need relationships to survive. They can't take risks because they have someone else's emotions to manage. They can't pursue their authentic path because they're constantly negotiating their choices through someone else's fears and limitations. But imagine a different kind of person. Someone who has done the inner work Jung described. Someone who has integrated their anima or animus, faced their shadow, and become psychologically complete. This person doesn't need relationships. They choose them, and choice changes everything. When you can walk away from any situation that doesn't serve your growth, you become genuinely powerful. When you don't need external validation to feel whole, you become immune to manipulation. When you stop seeking completion through others, you start creating from your full potential. Society cannot afford too many people like this. Complete individuals ask uncomfortable questions. They challenge systems that depend on emotional dependency. They refuse to stay in situations that diminish them just to avoid being alone. And most dangerously, they prove to everyone around them that the desperate search for your other half is actually the thing keeping you from becoming whole. Jung discovered that true individuation, becoming who you really are, requires periods of solitude, not the bitter isolation of rejected people, but the chosen separation necessary for deep psychological work. During these periods, You face what he called the dark night of the soul. All the parts of yourself you've been running from, all the aspects you've been projecting onto others, all the pain you've been avoiding through constant relationship seeking. Most people never complete this process because it's terrifying. It's easier to stay distracted by relationship drama than to face your own psychological depths. It's more comfortable to blame relationship failures on incompatibility than to acknowledge your own incomplete development. But the people who persist through this darkness discover something incredible. They don't need anyone else to make them feel whole because they've become whole themselves. This is what society fears most. People who have faced their own psychology completely and emerged as integrated individuals. Because integrated individuals can't be controlled through their neediness. They can't be manipulated through their loneliness. They can't be kept in line through their desperate search for validation. And their very existence challenges the fundamental assumption that human beings are naturally incomplete and need external salvation. Jung called marriage a psychological container, a structure that forces two people to confront their unconscious patterns through daily interaction. But he also understood that this container only works when both people have done significant individual psychological work first. Without that foundation, marriage becomes what he called mutual unconsciousness, two incomplete people enabling each other's psychological avoidance. The modern marriage industry has completely corrupted Jung's insights. Instead of encouraging individual psychological development before partnership, it promotes the idea that relationships themselves will complete you. Instead of teaching people to integrate their own masculine and feminine energies, it encourages gender role dependency. Instead of supporting the difficult work of individuation, it offers the fantasy that love conquers all without any personal transformation required. But love doesn't conquer anything. Consciousness conquers unconsciousness. Integration conquers projection. Wholeness conquers neediness. And the person who achieves these psychological states doesn't need marriage to feel complete. They might choose marriage, but from a completely different foundation. Not from desperate need, but from genuine abundance. Not from fear of being alone, but from desire to share a complete life with another complete person. This transforms everything about how relationships work. When two psychologically whole people come together, they create what Jung called a conjunctio, a genuine union that enhances both individuals without diminishing either. But this kind of relationship is rare because it requires both people to have completed the terrifying work of becoming themselves first. And society actively discourages this work because psychologically complete individuals are harder to control. Think about every message you receive about relationships. The romantic comedies that show incomplete people finding salvation through love. The self-help books that promise techniques for attracting the right person instead of teaching you to become the right person. The social pressure that treats singleness as a problem to be solved rather than a valid life choice. All of these messages serve the same function. They keep you focused on external solutions to internal problems. They convince you that your psychological incompleteness is normal and natural, rather than a developmental stage to be transcended. They make you believe that individuation is selfish, rather than necessary preparation for genuine intimacy. Jung understood that the collective unconscious contains archetypes, universal patterns that shape human behavior. One of the most powerful archetypes is the divine marriage, the union of masculine and feminine energies that creates wholeness. But here's what most people miss. This union is supposed to happen within each individual first, then be expressed through conscious partnership with another whole person. Society has corrupted this archetype by teaching people to seek external union without achieving internal integration. This creates relationships based on mutual incompleteness rather than shared wholeness. Partners become psychological crutches for each other instead of conscious companions supporting each other's continued growth. The person who breaks free from this pattern becomes dangerous to the entire system. They prove that psychological wholeness is possible. They demonstrate that happiness doesn't require romantic partnership. They show that complete individuals can create more powerful relationships than incomplete ones ever could. And their very existence challenges everyone around them to examine their own motivations for seeking partnership. Jung believed that the goal of human development is individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who society expects you to be. But marriage, as commonly practiced, often prevents individuation by creating external obligations that distract from internal development. Instead of doing the difficult work of integrating your own psychology, You become focused on managing relationship dynamics. Instead of facing your own shadows, you project them onto your partner. Instead of developing your own masculine and feminine aspects, you depend on your partner to provide what you haven't developed yourself. Instead of becoming complete, you become half of something that feels whole only when both pieces are present. This mutual incompleteness creates the perfect conditions for societal control. Incomplete individuals can't leave situations that don't serve them because they believe they need relationships to survive. They can't take risks because they have someone else's security to consider. They can't pursue their authentic calling because they're constantly managing the emotional needs of someone who hasn't done their own psychological work. But the person who achieves Jung's individuation operates from a completely different foundation. They can choose relationships that enhance their development rather than relationships that simply avoid loneliness. They can walk away from situations that diminish their potential without feeling like they're giving up their chance at happiness. They can pursue their authentic path without needing someone else's permission or approval. This psychological freedom is what society fears most. Because free individuals ask uncomfortable questions. They challenge systems that depend on emotional dependency. They refuse to accept explanations that don't make sense just to maintain social harmony. They create new possibilities that threaten established power structures. Jung discovered that most psychological problems stem from the gap between who people really are and who they think they should be. Marriage often widens this gap by adding another layer of expectations and obligations that have nothing to do with authentic development. Instead of becoming more yourself, you become someone's husband or wife, taking on roles that might be completely incompatible with your true nature. The individuation process Jung described requires courage to disappoint others in service of becoming authentic. But marriage often demands the opposite, the willingness to compromise your authentic nature in service of maintaining harmony. This creates what Jung called a neurotic split between your true self and your social persona. People who complete the individuation process before considering marriage approach partnership from an entirely different perspective. They're not seeking someone to complete them because they've already done the work of becoming complete. They're not avoiding loneliness because they've learned to enjoy their own company. They're not following social scripts because they've developed the courage to write their own story. When two such people come together, they create something unprecedented. A relationship based on choice rather than need, growth rather than security, consciousness rather than unconscious patterns. But society doesn't promote this possibility because it would require admitting that the entire marriage industrial complex is built on selling solutions to artificially created problems. Jung warned that the collective unconscious can become a prison when people mistake shared beliefs for natural law. The belief that human beings are incomplete without romantic partnership is one of the strongest collective patterns, but it's still just a belief. And like all beliefs, it can be examined, questioned, and transcended by individuals brave enough to think for themselves. The person who achieves psychological wholeness through Jung's individuation process becomes living proof that another way is possible. They show that happiness doesn't require external validation, that completeness doesn't require partnership, that authentic relationships are possible, but only after you've become authentic yourself. Their existence poses a fundamental challenge to everyone around them, not through argument or persuasion, but through simple demonstration that the assumptions most people live by are actually choices. And once you realize that your beliefs about relationships are choices rather than facts, everything changes. You start asking different questions. Am I seeking partnership from wholeness or from neediness? Am I attracted to this person because they enhance my life or because they fill gaps I haven't learned to fill myself? Am I choosing this relationship because it supports my authentic development or because it helps me avoid the work of becoming complete? These questions lead to uncomfortable realizations for most people. They discover that their relationship choices have been driven more by psychological dependency than by genuine compatibility. They realize that they've been seeking external solutions to internal problems. They understand that their desperate need for partnership might actually be preventing them from developing the psychological wholeness that would make real intimacy possible. Jung believed that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the relationship with yourself. But society teaches the opposite. It convinces you that self-focus is selfish, that independence is dangerous, that the only path to fulfillment leads through romantic partnership. These teachings serve the collective unconscious, by keeping individuals psychologically dependent and therefore controllable. But some people break free from these patterns. They do the difficult work Jung described. They face their shadows, integrate their anima or animus, and achieve the psychological wholeness he called individuation. And when they do, they become dangerous to a system built on emotional dependency. They prove that completion is possible without partnership. They demonstrate that happiness doesn't require external validation. They show that authentic relationships emerge from wholeness rather than neediness. And most threateningly, they reveal that everything most people believe about love and marriage might be collective programming rather than natural law. The question Jung would ask you is simple, but profound. Are you seeking relationships because you've become someone worth sharing life with? Or because you believe you need someone else to make you complete? Your answer reveals whether you're living from individuation or from collective unconscious patterns that serve interests other than your own authentic development. Right now, as you process these ideas, something is shifting in your understanding. You're beginning to see the invisible forces that have shaped your beliefs about relationships, marriage, and human completion. Jung would tell you that this awareness is the first step towards psychological freedom. But awareness alone isn't enough. The real question is what you'll do with this knowledge. The collective unconscious will pull you back toward familiar patterns. Society will pressure you to ignore these insights and return to seeking external solutions to internal problems. Friends and family will question your motives for examining beliefs they've never thought to question. But Jung discovered that individuation requires courage to stand alone when necessary, to think independently even when others prefer conformity. You're standing at a crossroads that every psychologically developing person must face. Down one path lies the comfort of collective assumptions, the security of shared beliefs, the ease of following scripts others have written for your life. This path promises immediate acceptance but long-term psychological dependency. Down the other path lies the challenge of individual development, the uncertainty of creating your own values, the difficulty of becoming psychologically complete before seeking completion through others. This path offers no guarantees except one: you'll belong to yourself completely. Jung called this choice the most important decision any person can make. Not because one path is inherently superior, but because only one path leads to authentic individuation. Only one path creates the psychological foundation necessary for conscious relationships. Only one path breaks the cycle of mutual dependency that keeps people trapped in unconscious patterns. The person who chooses individual psychological development before seeking partnership becomes a living example of human potential. They prove that the desperate search for your other half is actually preventing you from becoming whole. They demonstrate that authentic relationships are possible, but only after you've become authentic yourself. Their very existence challenges the marriage industrial complex because they can't be sold solutions to problems they've already solved. They can't be manipulated through their loneliness because they've learned to transform solitude into self-discovery. They can't be controlled through their neediness because they've developed psychological self-sufficiency. But here's what makes their choice truly revolutionary. They don't reject relationships or marriage. They transform the entire foundation from which these choices are made. Instead of seeking partnership from incompleteness, they choose partnership from wholeness. Instead of using relationships to avoid psychological work, they use relationships to support continued growth. This creates possibilities that Jung knew were rare but essential for human evolution. Conscious partnerships between individuated people, relationships that enhance both partners without diminishing either, marriages that support authentic development rather than social conformity. The person reading these words right now has a choice that will echo through every remaining day of their life. You can continue living from collective unconscious patterns that make relationship choices for you, or you can begin the difficult but liberating work of psychological individuation that will allow you to choose consciously. Jung would remind you that this work can't be done in partnership with someone else. It requires periods of chosen solitude, uncomfortable self-examination, and the courage to face aspects of yourself you've been avoiding. But the person who completes this work emerges with something society can't provide: genuine psychological freedom. That freedom transforms everything. Your relationships become choices rather than needs. Your happiness becomes internally generated rather than externally dependent. Your life becomes an expression of your authentic nature rather than performance of social expectations. Most people will never experience this kind of freedom because they're too afraid of the temporary discomfort required to achieve it. They choose the familiar prison of emotional dependency over the uncertain path of psychological liberation. But the few who persist discover what Jung called the treasure hard to attain: complete ownership of their own psychological life. This ownership changes how you move through the world. You're no longer desperately seeking someone to complete you because you've done the work of becoming complete yourself. You're no longer afraid of being alone because you've learned to transform solitude into self-discovery. You're no longer controlled by the collective unconscious because you've developed the courage to think independently. Jung understood that this transformation serves not just individual development, but collective evolution. Every person who achieves psychological individuation makes it easier for others to break free from unconscious patterns. Every complete individual proves that another way of living is possible. Their existence becomes a beacon for others trapped in cycles of relationship dependency, emotional neediness, and psychological projection, not through preaching or persuasion, but through simple demonstration that human wholeness is achievable through individual psychological work. This is why society needs you to believe in marriage as external salvation rather than conscious choice, because people who achieve internal salvation become impossible to control through their emotional needs. They can't be manipulated through their loneliness, pressured through their insecurities, or kept in line through their desperate search for completion. Jung's message is both challenging and liberating. You have the capacity for psychological wholeness, but that capacity can only be realized through individual effort. You can create authentic relationships, but only after you've become authentic yourself. You can find genuine love, but only after you've learned to love your own completely developed nature. The question isn't whether you should or shouldn't get married. The question is whether you'll make that choice from psychological wholeness or from unconscious neediness. Whether you'll seek partnership to enhance a complete life or to escape the work of becoming complete. Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires the courage to question everything society has taught you about relationships, marriage, and human completion. It requires the strength to choose temporary discomfort over permanent dependency. The person who makes this choice discovers something extraordinary. They don't need society's permission to feel complete, because they've done the internal work that creates genuine completeness. They don't need external validation because they've developed internal authority. They don't need relationships to feel whole because they've achieved the psychological integration that makes wholeness possible. This transformation is available to anyone willing to do Jung's work of individuation. But it requires something most people aren't prepared to give: the willingness to be temporarily alone in order to become permanently free. The courage to face your own psychology completely rather than projecting it onto others. The strength to become psychologically self-sufficient before seeking conscious partnership. Jung's promise is profound but demanding. You can achieve psychological freedom, but only through individual effort. You can create authentic relationships, but only after becoming authentic yourself. You can find genuine love, but only after learning to love your own completely integrated nature. The choice is yours, and it's being made right now through every decision to continue seeking external solutions or begin internal development. Jung would remind you that this choice determines not just your relationship future, but your entire psychological destiny. Because the person who becomes complete within themselves gains access to possibilities that dependent people never discover. Your psychological freedom is the greatest gift you can give, not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. Because free people create free relationships. Conscious individuals inspire consciousness in others, and complete people prove that human wholeness is possible for anyone brave enough to do the work Jung described. The time for choosing is now. The path toward individuation begins with a single step: the willingness to question whether the desperate search for your other half might actually be preventing you from becoming whole. Jung's insights are waiting, but they can only be realized through your own courageous psychological work. The marriage industrial complex wants you to believe you're broken without partnership. Jung proved you're complete when you develop the courage to become yourself. The question is which voice you'll choose to believe, and that choice will determine everything about the relationships you create and the life you live. Write in the comments right now: I choose wholeness over neediness. Let's see how many people are ready to begin Jung's work of psychological individuation, instead of continuing to seek external solutions to internal completion. Your comment becomes a commitment to your own psychological development, and a beacon for others trapped in cycles of relationship dependency. Hit that subscribe button because this journey toward psychological freedom requires continued exploration of ideas that challenge everything society teaches about relationships, success, and human potential. Every video we create reveals another layer of the programming that keeps people trapped in unconscious patterns, and your subscription ensures you never miss insights that could transform your entire approach to life. The next video will expose another carefully hidden truth about modern life that keeps people psychologically dependent and emotionally controlled. Another revelation that will challenge beliefs you've never thought to question and show you possibilities you've never imagined. The transformation begins now, but it only continues through your commitment to consciousness over comfort, truth over convenience, and individual development over collective conformity.